Bienvenidos todos y todas a la segunda charla o conversación que tenemos de este semestre de PFC. Les pediría para los que les sea posible prender su cámara aunque sea unos instantes para que nuestro invitado Tim McDonald los pueda ver y pueda por lo menos saber, excepto a ti Luis que estás manejando y me pones muy nervioso. Los demás sí pueden prender su cámara, aunque sean unos minutos, se los agradeceríamos mucho para que lo puedan ver a Tim. Entonces, gracias a todas y todos. La dinámica es la que hicimos la clase pasada. Va a presentar Tim. Y después de eso vamos a tener la serie de preguntas y respuestas, comentarios, y esperemos que les guste, o sea, más bien que le encuentren gran utilidad. Por favor, sáquenle todo el jugo a Tim y al trabajo que hacen ellos. Creo que va a ser interesante. Y ahora muchas gracias. Ahora voy a cambiar a inglés para ya presentarlo y que empiece la conferencia, ¿sale? So everybody welcome, be more than welcome to this presentation, this conversation with Tim McDonald. I met Tim a long time ago. We don't want to count the years, but it was here. I was beginning being a professor here at Tec de Monterrey, and he was introducing this idea of like a sustainable development. He really moved my mind when I met him in Philadelphia, where all his work is, with his company Onion Flats. And so what really interests me about Onion Flats and Tim's work is that the idea that to be a real estate developer is not, has no problem with being sustainable or being net zero even. I remember he said when we were there in one of his flats, looking at his work, that LEED was not enough for him. The LEED certification was not enough for him. He wanted to go more because he was really aware that LEED certification was just like one step, but he wanted to go beyond that. And that really moves my mind. So since then, I've been following his work, and today, finally, we have the pleasure to have him virtually here, but one day he will come, Tim, and you will enjoy the good weather. And during spring, I don't know, I hope soon. So please, let's hear, Tim, the screen is yours. I think that's my introduction for you. I was going to read your brief presentation on the website, but he's a good lad and then let's begin.
Great, thanks so much, Ruben, and everybody for inviting me. This is a real treat. This is so fun. I'm presenting to you in Mexico from Massachusetts in a town called Manchester by the Sea. I'm like looking not so much at the water right now, but it's a beautiful town. And I'm talking to 33 people in Mexico. It never ceases to amaze me that we can do this. I have way too much here. So I put a timer on myself, which I never do. But I think it's going to be important for today. I put a lot in here, but I thought what I would do first is this. I want to show you your fifth grade, fifth year, right? Fifth year thesis in architecture. And I thought it might be helpful for you to see there's so many ways to be an architect. There's so many directions. I think architects are the best trained, the most holistically trained profession out there, that you can go into so many different fields and do so many different things, that I thought it might be helpful to show you just some of the early projects, because it's, life's organic. We don't start out knowing exactly who we are and what we want to do with our lives. And maybe by the time we die, we figure out what we want to do with our lives. But I've been through a long process of trying to figure this stuff out. So I think what would be helpful is to just show you I'm going to go through some early work that is not focused on what this title is, which is climate change, and the role that architects play in that, and the leverage that we have to make a difference. It's actually a different approach to architecture that kind of informed where I am now. And I will say this, as Ruben mentioned, it's kind of unique to be a developer, architect, and builder of your own projects, but I actually think it should be less unique, because I always liken it to handing, if I were a painter, and I hand my brush to somebody else to paint, to actually physically paint the painting, I just find so much pleasure in building the work that we design. I also get the opportunity to explore a lot of different ideas that most clients would never allow me to do. So we're architects, developers, builders, and we also have started a couple of companies along the way to just feed our work, a green roof and solar company called Grass. This is the first project we bought, and the intention here was to buy this old building in Old City, Philadelphia, and to renovate it, not because I wanted to be a developer. This was an accidental company. I didn't know what a developer was, but I did know how to build things. My dad taught us how to build growing up. And this is my brother and I with his hand. He's worried sick about what we've just done. We've purchased this building. But the intention was to renovate the upper floors in order to start an architecture gallery on the ground floor. That's how we started. I didn't want to be a developer. This is what the building looked like. This was a friends and family kind of endeavor. We had very little money to renovate this. This was my dad helping on the construction. We worked weekends and nights while I was working for an architecture firm. I was also teaching at the time. So this was the essence of, I don't know if you know the term sweat equity, but where nobody got paid to do anything. We just created this space for this experiment. And this is what it was. It was a 5-story warehouse, very close to the river, used 200 years ago to store grain and all kinds of things that were coming from the ports. So these wide open spaces, we had very little money to renovate them. In fact, all we could do was build a bathroom and a kitchen and a second means of egress on the outside, and turn this dump of a building into something that had new life. And so this was really exciting. I mean, and I had students working for me at the time too. So I would teach them how to build. I would teach them how to weld. I'm a big welder, big fan of that material. In fact, I named my daughter Steel. How silly is that? But I would give students little projects like this. I gave them, this was a 5th-year student, and I said, you have 1 day to design and build this cabinet, and you have this. I gave him the material, and so I gave him a budget and a schedule, and I said, do whatever you want. And another student, I gave an opportunity to design a bathroom however he wanted, and it was this translucent glass bathroom. So that was the essence of this project for us, and we turned this into this wonderful space. First time ever was a gallery for architecture in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has 4 schools of architecture in it. So this was a real place where community, for the first time, the architectural community could come together. And we ran that for several years. And then I got really excited about the idea of doing this again. We didn't start out wanting to be developers and builders. So I would take walks on the weekends, and I walked to this neighborhood to the north of us, which was really derelict. It was a former industrial neighborhood with lots of meat packing plants and all kinds of empty buildings. And I fell in love with this really crappy building. It was an old meat packing plant. And when I say that, you can imagine meatpacking plants usually have no windows, nothing but big, thick insulation around the walls, and meat hanging all over the place. And that's what this was. This was a place of death and darkness. And we turned it into this place of light and life. And we tried to leave a lot of the raw, what I would call nasty bits about the place intact. The paint peeling, the raw brick falling apart, and insert these fine kind of handmade pieces. Again, I had 8 students working with me. We did this by hand, all of us. We made all the doors and windows that you see, the stairs, the handrails, the cabinetry. I gave people opportunities to kind of design spaces, and one student said, I'd like to put a closet right here in order to frame an entrance into the dining room here, which was you'd have to walk over the threshold of the scale that weighed the meat when it came into the building. And so the joke was you could weigh yourself before and after a meal. So we had fun every single day. Every door was handmade. We started to develop a kind of language of architectural objects that separated space rather than walls. So this industrial kind of open space could still feel that way and yet have these separate rooms to them. We reused some of the meat racks to have rolling closets that you could push in and out of bedrooms. This was an opportunity. This was along a property line, this apartment, and the only way to bring light into it was from the street and from above. So we built these monitor skylights that brought light in from above. And one of the students said, I would love to get up there. This is facing east in the morning. I'd love to get up there and have a cup of coffee in the morning. And I said, okay, well, how would you get up there? So he built this ladder. And then he said, what do you think? And I said, it's beautiful, but how are you going to climb with one hand when you're holding a coffee cup with the other hand? And so he came back and he welded these little flat bars on the side right here so you could set it, climb, set it. And that was the nature of our practice at that time. The construction site was a place of creativity. Every day, we would design and build something on the spot. We would do drawing sketches on the walls. We'd make all day long. This was part of, I don't even have time to tell you about the time that I spent in Japan doing something very similar to this a couple of years before. But this was like an atelier. This was less a construction site than kind of like a studio, an architectural studio where you physically make things. You know, this person had called this the 1 hour door because they had an hour to make it and they had to make it out of scrap. So that was fun. And that was the nature of our practice at the time. It was a kind of hands-on design, build, touching everything, making everything approach to architecture. But it was a renovation as well. We had never done a new construction project. So in the next neighborhood to the north, we purchased this old, again, dump, literally a dump. The contractor that owned it filled it up with his trash for 25 years. And so anybody else would have knocked these buildings down and started from scratch. There was something beautiful about it, even though the pigeon shit was 2 feet deep throughout. We tried to save the buildings as they were. And it's this typical industrial building in the middle of a residential neighborhood in Philadelphia. That's what Philly used to be like. There were these industrial neighborhoods and all these row houses where the people that worked in the factory lived in the neighborhood. And so that's what we ended up doing. We said, let's turn this into, let's really understand what it means to live in an urban community. And I think the 2 words that I remember from this project are intimacy and privacy, because community is kind of the line between that. People want their own private space, but they want to be connected as well. And so what does it mean to live next to somebody, really close to somebody, but to have your own sense of place? And so that's what we started. The idea for this community was to say, how do we test these ideas that we've seen in other neighborhoods in this place? And the way where we started was we took a typology of building that is very common in Philadelphia. It's called the Trinity. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's called literally, it's a one room per floor. This is one room here, here, here. And the kitchen was usually either in the basement or on the first floor, and then bedrooms were here. And these are tiny, tiny houses. And we were fascinated by the simplicity of these houses, actually wrapping the entire site. And so we said, let's actually think more carefully about what this is. And maybe there's a way to rethink this typology for this time, because these were built in the 17th and 18th centuries in rows. So these 20 by 20 foot buildings that could house people very inexpensively, very quickly. And then over time, they would build these extensions on the back of the buildings that would grow as the family would go. So we said, let's actually use that as a typology, but let's for the moment pull it away from its block and start to present those extensions more three-dimensionally, so that it's a more holistic kind of experience in the building. And then let's place one of these trinities, these kind of reconsidered trinities, back in the site, and then kind of like chess pieces, put them around and then weave this kind of green space in between. And then let's dress them with all of the different colors and materiality that is all around the neighborhood. And so that's what we did with this study. And then let's actually start putting other typologies that we find all around the neighborhood in here as well. This is a row house, which is a form of Trinity, but it's a very specific long, thin space. And then these classic industrial buildings that are always merged with these community, these residential communities. Let's keep that. And then we instituted this thing called a pavilion, which is maybe more of an institutional piece of program. So in a way, this was a microcosm of the city that we were working with, at least in terms of the typology and kind of scale of the spaces. Just trying to design what we thought a community was really about. And so as you can see, this green space kind of weaves in between. And what you realize when you're living there is that you have your own place, but you're a part of somebody else. You're very interconnected, and yet you have your own sense of place. And you can kind of see in these images how somebody sitting here is totally contained in their own world. The way the windows were designed was you can't really see into the bedroom. Some of them are higher, so you can't see what's. So we very carefully thought through these tight inside and outside connections between different buildings. This is a perfect example. For me, living in a city is like being in a collage. These layers of color, material, people that merge into each other yet have their own identity. And so that's kind of what we were shooting for. And these green spaces are owned by everybody. It's a communal, the communal green space, and yet people use their own green space and kind of capture their own. They don't own it, but they can use it with the help of the rest of the community. And then these row houses, these long, thin spaces, are usually really dark on the interior because they only have light coming in from the two short sides. But we said, let's flip that on its head. Let's cut this cavern right through the center of it. Let's have this 3-story space with these bridges that cross over that space to tie them back together. And then this is the first time my brother, in fact, not me, I wasn't interested in sustainability at the time. This was, I don't even know when this was, 2000 and not even, maybe 2000, 2001. My brother said, he's a plumber and he's my partner. He said, I want to generate power on this site. And I said, okay. So he went and got licensed to install solar panels. And so this is the first time we ever installed our first installation of solar panels. That's my brother right there. And he's a plumber. I was raised, my dad's a plumber as well. So we were both raised in the world of digging in the earth and putting in piping and capturing stormwater. And so he also said, I am not dumping rainwater into the sewer. That's crazy. We're sending rainwater down to the sewage treatment plants. This is stupid. We should save it. And so he got these old detention basins. We got them really cheap. And he created this filter system to capture all the rainwater from all the buildings in the entire site. And it filtered between the tanks, and then we would pump it back into the gardens around the community. About 6,000 gallons of water were saved. It was also the first time we tried a green roof. This is the green roof. It's up one story. I kind of like to call ourselves, we're kind of like tattoo artists, in the sense that when tattoo artists get started, they're not allowed to work on other people. So they work on themselves. And so we make our mistakes on our own projects, and we've made plenty. I could give a whole presentation on how we failed on every single project, but went and fixed it. So that led to this interest, a much more rigorous interest in what does sustainability mean anyway. And so at the time, 2006, 7, 8, we started designing, we started getting really interested in LEED, because LEED was the first time that there was a holistic structure to essentially hold us accountable for the things that we said that we wanted to do. And I'll get into that holistic structure in a second, but these became the first LEED Platinum duplexes in the country at the time. We also built the first LEED projects in Philadelphia. And here it is, it's called thin flats. And it's a reference to these thin spaces that I call row houses, this row typology that I'm fascinated. We've designed so many row houses, and we've never designed the same row house twice. And this is a good example of that. And so again, the face of these row houses, the two faces are all you have, because these buildings are packed right next to each other. And so that facade, which in this case happens to be facing south, that facade has to do a lot of work from an architectural perspective as well as from an environmental perspective. It's got to shade the building. It's facing south, it's got to shade the building. You've got to create outdoor spaces in this tight urban environment. These are duplex units. So by the way, this is one duplex unit. So there's a duplex here and a duplex here. This is another one. And so you need two means of egress out of a basement. So what we did was we pushed the facade back here. And in so doing, we were able to get glazing down into the basement. So the basement doesn't feel like a basement at all. It's filled with light, but at the same time, we've got this interstitial space that is both a shading device for the windows as well as a kind of hangout space. And here it is on opening night. These kids scared the hell out of me. I thought they were going to crawl out. And there it is on opening night, 2008. By the way, the next day, I don't know how old you all were, but if you don't remember, Lehman Brothers went under. So the Great Recession started the next day after completing the most expensive thing I've ever designed in my life. We were scared to death because we were going to sell these apartments, and we couldn't. It turned out that we sold just enough of them at the worst financial time in 50 years. We completed this project, and luckily, and I really believe it's because of the sustainability and design features of it, we were able to sell just enough units in the first year to kind of, and then we rented out the rest of the units to make the project viable. But I can tell you this is one of the reasons why architects don't want to become developers, because then you are truly 100% responsible for your work. And I find some freedom in that, frankly, but others don't. We included a 3-wheeled electric truck, and the only electric vehicles at the time in the United States, anywhere, was really from China. And it was this 3-wheeled truck called a zap truck. And we just said, hey, if we're giving people appliances, why not give them a a little electric vehicle too, to promote electric vehicles. And so, like I mentioned, it's a duplex, which means the bottom 2 floors are one apartment and the other 2 floors are another apartment. This has a really beautiful green roof, which you'll see in a second. This has a garden in the back. A roof is really important in an urban environment. It has to do so much work. It has to generate power. It has to manage stormwater. Open space is such a commodity in an urban environment, so it's got to be an open space. And so we really make an effort to make the most out of every roof there is. If all a roof does is shed water, then it's a dumb idea. But a good idea, you know what a good idea, the definition of a good idea is in my mind? It's something that has at least 3 functions, right? At least 3 functions. If it's got 1 function, it's dumb. It just does one thing. But man, stormwater management, reduce your cooling in the summertime, is an outdoor space, generates power. That's how you should be thinking about good ideas in architecture, in my opinion. So this does all the hot water for the apartments, and there's this cut through the building on the first 2 levels that brings light into these long thin spaces that we then filter into the other rooms through these transom windows, as well as this glass bridge that brings it down. Like this is on the other side of this wall. So you're rarely turning lights on during the day in this building. So that was at the time we thought we were the bee's knees. We thought we had it all figured out. We knew everything about sustainability, and yet it was just the beginning of our journey. You know, LEED is, I mentioned, it's a holistic strategy, right? It's about all aspects of what it means to make buildings on this planet. You've got to think about the sites where they former industrial sites that you're turning back into useful sites. That's good. Are they farmland that you're turning into housing? That's bad. What about water? What about energy? And what about where your materials come from? The indoor air quality, all these things. That's what LEED was about. But we noticed that we were doing 90% of this stuff anyway. And that, you know, when you really sit down and think about it, the hard work is here with energy. That's the most challenging stuff. The water, I mean, am I ever going to buy a toilet that doesn't use half the water that another toilet would use? Why? Why would I ever do that? It doesn't require any thought, right? But energy requires a lot of thought. Now, why is that important? Because of all the stuff we were talking about earlier. But most importantly, this, and I wish I could not dream about this every night, but I do. Buildings are responsible for almost half of our climate crisis. Let that sink in. If you don't know that, as architects, you should know that. Buildings are responsible for almost half. Worse, your city and my city are responsible for 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions, okay? Buildings and cities are responsible for 3/4 of the issue. Do you think we have a chance in hell of solving the climate crisis if we don't do it with buildings? This weight is on our shoulders, okay? I'm like, to me, this would be the equivalent of, if schools don't take this as foundational as I take it, it would be the equivalent of telling students that they can go build buildings on air, that they don't need to be put on the ground, or they can put them on marshmallows. It's okay. It's that irresponsible. Like, you do no harm, right? You don't design buildings that kill people. Well, we shouldn't be doing that here. To me, it's what I call the new gravity of our time. The climate crisis is as foundational as gravity for me. And you need to start thinking about, this isn't about, oh, maybe we'll do something a little sustainable. That's like saying I'm a little pregnant. Okay, you can't do something a little sustainable, especially when buildings are responsible and cities are responsible for the majority of our climate crisis. You've got to take this on. Now, those of you who are interested in numbers and know this stuff, I just want to point out some pretty big numbers. See this red box? That red box, this comes from Ed Masria, and if you don't know who Ed Masria is, you should look him up because he's a god of sustainability for the past 40 years. He's the one that started Architecture 2030. He was a founder of US Green Building Council, which is LEED. He wrote a book called the Solar Manual, Solar in the sixth. Anyway, he's amazing. He's still going. And he lectured at our conference. And he made the point of, so you all know about the Paris Climate Agreement, I hope. It's the first time in human history that almost every country in the world came together and said, okay, this climate thing is a real problem, and we've got until 2050 to solve it. And it's about how much carbon we put into the atmosphere. So this is how much carbon we have left to put into the atmosphere. 340 gigatons of CO2. That's kind of the bank account left. Now, what happens if we put more than that? We won't be able to stop the worst effects of climate change. And so everything you've heard about, floods and fires and sea level rise and increased temperatures and increased precipitation, all that stuff, you can't put it back in the bottle, okay? So if we warm the globe more than 1.5 degrees centigrade above in pre-industrial levels, 99.9% of all climate scientists say we're kind of screwed, okay? So we've got to keep this level of CO2. We can't have any more than that. Well, if you drew a line, and that's what I love about this image. If you said, if all the countries in the world said, we hit peak emissions in 2020, let's just draw a straight line to 2050. You guys know geometry. The area of that triangle is 600 gigatons, which is almost twice. So guess what? We don't have until 2050. You know what we have? We've squandered all that time. We squandered 20 years of work. We should have been doing this 20 years ago. So we've got to radically reduce, like by 65% by 2030 in order to phase out carbon emissions by 2040. So this isn't a 2050 discussion anymore. It's a 2040 discussion. That's less than 20 years. This is your lifetime. Now, you know what my country has been like for the past 4 years, not the past half year, but the guy before him. They were devastating, absolutely devastating to the entire issue. But the good news is the cities didn't care. They continued with the Paris Climate Agreement. Most cities in the United States have maintained that. They have climate action plans that are committed to the Paris Climate Agreement goals. And so that's great. Turns out Mexico was an initial leader in climate action. Notice the date on this, April 20th, 2012. This was really exciting. You guys were like ahead of most countries. And then apparently you're sliding backwards, just like we did for 4 years. We slid backwards. But guess what? Mexico City, Guadalajara, they have very aggressive climate action plans. That's what you all need. That's what everybody needs. It doesn't matter whether the federal government is doing what they're doing. We didn't care about the past 4 years in this country. We just plowed ahead with all the stuff that we knew needed to be done. I think you need to do the exact same thing. So look, what are we talking about? We're talking about carbon neutral buildings by 2040. I'm going to start moving because I got a lot to go. What does that mean? It means buildings. It doesn't mean you buy carbon offsets from some, solar farm somewhere. No, you generate what you need on site. That's what I mean by net zero energy buildings and carbon neutral buildings. Okay, so this is a typical row house in Philadelphia. And this is how much energy that row house uses. And this is how big the roof is, right? So could this building get to net zero? In other words, generate all that it needs on its own site? Well, yes and no. It would need a roof this big. That's the problem, right? So it only has a roof this big. So that's 80% less. Well, that means that the consumption of energy has to be 80% less then, right? If your roof is going to generate what you need, you've got to reduce consumption. Heating and cooling is more than half the issue. So what's the best heating and cooling system in the world? It's a coat. Don't think about the pistons and the machines. Think about how we generate heat or cooling and let it just go outside. That's all we do. We have in an environment like Alaska, it would be like wearing a windbreaker. That's how we build our buildings. And I'll show you some images of that so that you know I'm not kidding. That is what I focus on. It's the fabric first of the building. I am focused on what the envelope of the building can do to get us to where we need to be. And that's what Passive House, which is this German building standard that actually started in North America in the 60s, is focused on. It's a fabric first approach to building. And it's really about just good building science. It's about thinking about the envelope and thermal comfort of your building first. Continuous insulation, thermal bridge-free construction, making it super airtight. In fact, airtightness is more important than insulation when it comes to energy consumption. And when you make a super airtight building, you've got to give it a lung to breathe so that you can take in fresh air, clean it, and then exhaust stale air out. And so in these Passive House buildings, they have some of the best indoor air quality of all places on the planet. The other thing I like about Passive House is the very simple metrics. And don't worry if you don't know what these metrics mean. Let me just put it this way. Imagine if buildings, if all we had to do, when you get into an architecture firm, you're going to have building codes, energy codes, all kind of codes that guide what you do. Energy codes are the most complex things ever you could ever want to read. I've never read them because I tried to and I fell asleep. What if energy codes simply said your building can consume no more than 38 kBTUs per square foot per year, or in kilowatt hours, 4.5 kilowatt hours per square foot per year? That's like saying, that's like a car, right? A car has got a 300 miles to the gallon. That's a really good car, okay? What if all we did was say buildings can only consume so much energy? That would make designing construction of buildings so much simpler than it is today. And that's what I love about Passive House, because it's this very simple metric that gets us there. All right, now I'm going to zip through some of these things. This is a project that we finished in 2015, 26 townhomes. And when you can orient your buildings, many times you can't in an urban environment, to the south, do it, because you can really control the way the sun either helps or hurts your building. You can generate power, but you need to also shade in the summertime, especially in your climate. You have got to keep the sun out in the summertime. But you also have to we also have to rethink how we make buildings, because we've been making buildings the same way. Now, in your country, I think it's very different way of constructing this kind of housing, much more masonry and concrete. Here, it's all wood. And we've been building the same way for 100 years. One stick at a time on site. When it's raining and snowing, it's silly. And so we started a factory where we could control the process and make these Passive House certified components in this factory, and then deliver them to the site, set them up, build them in essentially half the time. The flooring and the kitchens and the bathrooms are all in the factory. They're built along a factory line with about 100 guys doing, and much better quality. And this is the way we did the first 3 houses. We did the others in a very different way, but that's got a long story associated with it. But the performance specs are all the same on all the buildings. They're still built to the Passive House standard. And anybody tells you that a roof can't be, generate power and have a green roof and manage stormwater, just show them this image. They absolutely can. In fact, green roofs make solar panels more efficient because it keeps the temperature of the roof lower, which makes them more efficient. Now, I said you got to make an airtight building. Well, guess what? We measure how airtight our buildings are. We blow them up like a balloon with this fan, and then we measure. And that number means 0.49, call it 0.5. That means half the volume of this house can leak out of the holes in an hour under this pressure. Do you know what a typical house is? 7 times the volume of a house leaks out in an hour. So this is 14 times more airtight. And that's why these buildings use 75% less energy than a typical code building. And here's an example of that. In this case, this is one of our first, we only got to 68% better. But this is 2,500 square, this is a 4-story building, $90 a month for all utilities. By the way, we don't use gas. We haven't put gas in a building in 10 years. This is an all electric building. And so that $90 a month is all the utilities. And by the way, they could put another level of solar on this and they'd get that to 0. Okay, right around the corner, I'd showed you this one earlier, and then I showed you the Thin Flats project. Well, right across the street is this. So what's interesting is we did this in 99, we did this in 2008, we came back in 2007, and this was our Passive House project. This is we call it the Battery, and it's a 25-unit apartment building, and we were interested in addressing 2 issues. The neighborhood was starting to get gentrified, and so the local issue we wanted to address was, is there a way, without any government subsidies, that we could actually design an apartment that would be less to rent? Because young people were being pushed out of the neighborhood, prices were going up, and people were having to move out. And so the goal was to be able to rent these below market rate, but without any government subsidies. And that's what we did. The average is about $1,300, $1,375 a month, but we include the utilities on top of that. And I'll show you what that means. And obviously the larger global issue we were addressing was to zero out the building's role, climate change. 25 apartments, we got to work. This is all fun. That's my brother, that's him and me. Boy, I think I look older there. My goodness. This is what it's like. You just got to dig in, literally. Thermal bridge free. Do you know what that means? It means that if you've got steel on the inside, it can't go to the outside because it's a bridge, a thermal bridge. So you got to break those bridges. So this is a fiberglass plate that breaks the link between these 2 pieces of steel. You've got to be really careful. Any steel, you've got to wrap with insulation. You've got to have this airtight, lots of detailing, fun detailing around all the joints between walls and roofs. I'm not going to go into this, but I do want to show you this. This is interesting. So this is the thermal envelope. This is just the mechanical room in the basement. And you can see this yellow, this heat. This is heat. So this is about 20 degrees outside. It was a really cold day. Notice there's no heat escaping from the building, but see that little gap right there? That gives you a sense of where that heat's escaping. So it's not escaping from the thermal envelope, it's escaping from the mechanical room. But that's just a perfect example of how a passive house should look. All right, so this is a parking on the ground floor. We've got a lobby here, a couple of apartments, very simple, double loaded corridor, 1-bedroom apartments. And in this case, we had our envelope, because the envelope is the key, show up on pallets, not a modular building, but what we call a panelized strategy. And so it showed up on pallets. We unpacked those pallets, a 2x6 stud wall with an air barrier, some insulation, other weather resistant barrier here, and we pieced them together like Legos. And on every floor, we just and the triple pane windows and doors were installed in the factory before they were delivered. So airtight, watertight, and the project went up in half the time. These guys, they didn't need scaffolding on the outside. It was just a really wonderful process. Sometimes use my kid as labor. That makes it cheaper. No, I'm kidding. We just have fun. You got to teach them. This is at the roof because you've got to think about all these details where roofs meet walls, and keeping that red line, which is the air barrier, tight and continuous. The rigid insulation, tight and continuous all the way around, like a nice tight coat. Sealing the joints of the panels on the roof to keep that air tight, making it now watertight. This is a green roof, so we have to treat it like a pool. And so we have to put about 2 feet of water in it for 2 days. And that's my roofer giving me the thumbs up that we didn't have any leaks. And so the building's starting to come together, and now it's time to build this structure for the solar array above. But at the same time, we drilled 2 holes 900 feet into the ground. And this is a section of the building. And this is 900 feet, just to give you some scale. I'll never do this again, by the way. This was the worst decision of my life, but because it's broken down so many times, and I think we fixed it finally. But geothermal, expensive, really difficult, and never do it again. So everything about my experience has been simplify, 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 simplify as we go. And on a job site, we get all excited when we do a blower door test. All the guys, the plumbers and the drywall people and all the laborers, they get excited because we're testing how airtight the building is. I know it sounds geeky and weird, but there's a case of beer ready to pop when we do the blower door test, and we hit it this time as well. This might be too much, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of, like, typically most apartment buildings, there's an electric meter for every single apartment, right? That takes up a ton of space, it takes up a ton of money. Why? When the apartment is going to use about $10 or $15 a month. So we said, let's make 1 meter and let's just charge tenants maybe a $50 a month flat fee. They love it, and it works really well. Here's the other crazy part. We have to start thinking about storage, batteries. This is my utility bill for the entire building. This is a 25-unit apartment building, right? So with all the solar, I get a bill each month somewhere around $900 a month, okay? Now, 440, half of that is what I generate, okay? So it's really $440 a month. The other half is called a demand charge right here, $332. Now, what is that about? That's about, and I'm sure it's the same in your country to some degree. Here's what it's about. Everybody comes home at 5 o'clock, they turn on their air conditioning, they take showers, and all this peak demand, there's peak, oh my God, that's 45 minutes. Okay, sorry. Peak demand. So we've got to cut that peak is what's giving me a bill that's twice as expensive. So how do you get rid of that? Batteries. You got to bring it down, right? So you could buy these really expensive Tesla batteries, or you could buy a car that has a really big battery in it for a hell of a lot cheaper. And it's also a car. It doesn't just sit there. So what if our communities, what if our apartment buildings, people didn't have to have cars? What if just like I give people washers and dryers, why don't I have a fleet of electric vehicles that you never have to own your vehicle again? It never has to use gas. This is a car share service, and it's an amenity like a gym in an apartment building. And at the same time, if I keep 5 of these cars here on a regular basis, it will cut my demand charge to 0. So, and it will feed back. So this bidirectional charger allows the building to charge the car, and then the car to charge the building, or the building to charge the car and the charge the car to the building. Anyway, and here it is. And these white panels on the facade here are, they have these LED lights above them. And those LED lights are tied into the energy monitoring system of the building. And they have an AP address. So they're actually attached to each individual apartment, but nobody knows which light is tied to which apartment. So if you're working within your energy budget, your light will glow green. If you're not, if you're really, consuming a lot of energy, it'll glow red and yellow. And so this is a way for the architecture to actually create a level of communication between the tenants in the building and the community at large. It's a certified passive house project. This is a really, not inexpensive, but this is what things were being built for at the time. And so we're building these buildings for what everyday code buildings are being built for, and yet they're using 75 to 80% less energy. Here's that parking underneath the building with the solar. Here's me, I'm always doing something with steel, building planters here. Here's our roof. We just completed it. That's what it looks like now. Wonderful place to be. And the apartments are really simple and clean with lots of light between the different rooms. My wife, luckily, is a potter, so she makes tiles for us, which is fun. It brings my kids in, get them to work more. And like I said, we're monitoring all the energy that we're consuming in here. And here's what this building has done. Those of you who don't know what an EUI is, it's like a miles per gallon of a building. The EUI of a typical code building is 59. The EUI of this building is 10, which is 83% better than a typical code building. So we can do this, people. We can do this cost effectively, creatively. None of this gets in the way of your creativity. Now, the last one I'm going to show you is this. It'll only take a couple minutes. We just completed this last year. It's called Front Flats. I'll talk a little bit about what the skin is. You'll see very clearly in a minute. It's kind of in your face. $180 a square foot. This is important for us up here, but this is, again, in line with everyday construction around us. The basement level, the only thing we really did here, this is south. So the only thing we really did was we carved this area out of the site. It's a very tight site, and terraced the ground down so that you can walk out from the basement. This is actually our office. So you can walk from the basement to the outside. And so the upper level is also our office. And then that's where the apartments start. And this is what that looks like, the facade of that section down terrace with this 1-story office building, and then our south facade. This is what it looks like in person. And you'll notice this facade is floating about 24 inches off the wall. It's very intentional. Oh, here's looking out from our office into that space. And the office is still empty these days. We had just completed our fun office during COVID, so nobody's going back yet. Here's another fun thing. When things get really small, now for us, small is 450 square feet. 450 square foot 1-bedroom apartment is pretty tiny. And so every inch matters. And so, these kitchen living spaces are starting to get kind of tiny. So we, because we're the developers, we get to say, let's rethink what a bathroom is. What's possible? What if we made this very thin bathroom, very thin? And I was reminded by my friend Marcel Duchamp in 1927 about this door that is always open and always closed. And so what happens if your shower is here, your toilet and bathroom is here, but this is the entrance into your apartment. This is a hallway. What happens if you put one of Marcel Duchamp's doors right there? And so that when it's open in this direction, it's circulation for the apartment. When it's closed and open in this direction, that hallway becomes your bathroom. And so your washer and dryer is here, your towel storage is here, it's all tiled, so it's wet. So all of a sudden the shower is now tied in with the bathroom. And I thought people would be freaked out by it, but they love it. They think it's totally fun. And that's what it feels like inside. And that's what it feels like inside. It's a really nice apartment, simple, clean materials. This is actually 320 square feet. This is a Murphy bed. This folds down into a bed and then folds back up. And then this facade, which is really weird. It's like sticking up past the windows, but it's floating away from the windows by about 24 inches. And here's why. Because in a passive house, you have got to keep the sun out in the summertime. So the summer sun, so this is just as importantly a shading device as it is a renewable energy device. But in the wintertime, you get all that free heat coming in. And because it's on this tight urban site, I didn't want people putting blinds or screens up because, so they can run around in their underwear and you can't even see inside. So it's a visual privacy device as well. And here's what it feels like on the facade. So it's as much a material as it is anything else. That's what it looks like. And it looks really opaque, right? From above, it looks like this. Somebody called it like a cross between a Death Star and a battery, like a D-volt battery. But on the roof, this is what it feels like. And it's really filled with light and air, and you can grow, people are growing tomatoes up there. And this is what we thought we would consume and produce. So this was going to be a net positive, we were hoping, energy building. And that's what happened. Net positive energy for the residential. So the residential, we projected this for the solar, it actually generated more. We projected consumption of this and we consumed more. But in the end, it was a net positive energy because we weren't trying to get this to zero, but now this gets to use that energy. So it's like really close to the entire building being net zero, but it's that's actual consumption. So look, I'll show you a couple more images. Again, how we build things is really important. The same metering strategy here where tenants pay a fixed fee. This really unique mechanical system that it doesn't look all that unique, but it is because it's a combination ERV, heating and cooling. So it does ventilation, heating, and cooling. It's really, so we're always testing new experimental mechanical systems. And there it is in the building. Oh, and I'm going to talk about hot water to these students. I don't think so, but I'll tell you this. We cut the hot water energy consumption in half. We cut the cost of the hot water system in half. And that's what's exciting for us about this stuff. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. And we can have a discussion if you still have time. Hopefully that was exciting for you, if not too long.
No, I think it was, I mean, it was when I heard your alarm, it's like, okay, 45 minutes already.
Yeah, I know.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't know if the students have any question, they can write it down in the chat if they are a little bit shy, or you can open your mic and just ask the question to Tim directly. He's from the house. So any questions, students?
Gotta be somebody.
Yeah, they're really shy.
That's okay. I was.
I mean, I'm not a student, but I will make the first question, and then the students will, be less shy and try to ask something. Actually, I'm just going to use a comment that Rodrigo just sent me through the chat. This morning we had an engineer in our class, and a hydraulic engineer, and he said that he made a comment that make us think a lot about how architects, we lack of tools to understand laws and regulation. So we think, for example, now the projects that the students are working on, we use land that we think that we can use. But even though we recognize as part of the process, the stakeholders and the possible and the use of that land and the ownership of that land, I think as to bend the rules, to understand how to bend the rules, we have to know and have a clear view of all the rules that a complex construction like what you showed is really, really difficult. I was thinking on geothermal, what you mentioned about the geothermal challenge. Once I asked if that was possible here to a colleague that he was really an engineer actually, and he just started laughing at me and said, "Oh wait, that is super expensive." So I scaled down in terms of complexity, and I said, "Okay, what about warm floors?" "No, Diana, that's really complex." I said, "Come on, it's not that complex. It's just a pipe with hot water that comes and it is not in our regulation, but at the same time, we are not to use this kind of tools or this kind of instrument, especially in construction in large scale." So my question is how to start doing it.
Yeah,
understanding this complexity in terms of technical, and also as an architect, how to promote this kind of techniques that is not that easy.
Yeah, look, I would never tell anybody to go down the path of life that I took, because it made sense for me. It does, it made sense for me to go study architectural history and theory in Montreal, how that's related to this, with Alberto Perez Gomez, how that's related to this. I know, but it doesn't look obvious. And then going and working for this crazy architect builder in Japan, how's that connected to Alberto Perez Gomez? And then coming and starting to be like a mechanical geek around equipment and heat loss and all of this stuff. Meanwhile, I fell asleep in my HVAC classes in architecture school, so all I can tell you is that, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but I wanted to do my work. I wanted to continue the excitement and the creativity and the being totally passionate and engaged that I experienced when I was in architecture school, in studio. I wanted to, because I heard about so many people getting out into the world, having to get that job, working for those big firms and being turned into a CAD jockey. And I didn't want to go that way. I wanted to find a way to do my own work, because I needed to remain passionate every day. So that's all I can tell you. Like, there is no question. First of all, I will say this: don't feel like you're not ready, because I know so many professional architects that say, "Oh, we got to get into those architecture schools and teach them how to be real architects, and they've got to learn about all these mechanical systems and codes and rules and this." And I say, no, they don't. They have to have some sense of it. They don't have to. This isn't a tech school. I mean, the thing about architecture, I'm sure it's the same in Mexico, but I have to work, which it means be educated, another 3 years in practice before I can even apply for my license, right? So when I get out of school, I still am being educated for the next 3 or 4 years. So no, you need to learn how to think in architecture school. You need to get, and for me, if I would suggest anything, it would be, don't think about all these. Those of you who are only interested in design, all you care about is your design studios, totally get it. That's where I was. start to maybe see these other classes that you're taking, and you're in your last year, but start to see them as how, like, we found a way to integrate all of these ideas and question them and bend those rules. We found that, but we've been doing this for 30, 40 years. I mean, you don't have to even come close to that. But if anything, just if there's a hint of interest in the relationship between mechanical systems and design and the sun, look into it. Look into it more deeply. If there's anything about the relationship between structure and design and sustainability, look into that. I mean, there's just so much about sustainability. We've got to get rid of concrete. Who's going to invent a concrete that, do you know that concrete is responsible for 7% of all greenhouse gas? One material is responsible for 7% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And there are all kinds of amazing architects, not engineers, architects out there experimenting with 20-story wood buildings, with green concrete that absorbs CO2. MIT lab. I mean, they're architecture better. This is just me. Architects better start owning all of the disciplines that tie into it, or we're going to be out of a job, in my opinion. If we don't start owning, if we don't stop saying, oh, that's the structural engineer, he'll figure it out. Oh, that's the mechanical engineer, they'll figure it out. Oh, that's the sustainability consultant, they'll figure it out. No, that's what we've been doing. And our discipline, if you look at where architects were in the social structure of our culture 100 years ago compared to where we are now, we're going to be out of a discipline in not too long a time. Now, that's a long way to answer your question, but I don't even know if I answered it, but I hope it helps.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Well, I have a comment. Can be a question, but I don't know if anyone wants to ask something. Please, come on, something.
Come on, guys, wake up.
Come on.
I get it. I totally get it. Don't worry.
So we had this, I don't know if it was conversation. I had a thought during this last weekend due to the floods in the city. And I was thinking, well, I don't know. And that caught my mind right now, and I'm connecting it with this idea of, like, if you are a designer right now, let's start thinking about design and questioning things. Stop thinking about the mechanicals or the structural things, because they will. I mean, that's how we work in our studios. I think is like, okay, the number of steel that will be in the concrete column, the engineer will solve it, right? But we need to know the shape and the kind of column we want. So that's the question. But I was thinking, because I've been thinking this for a while. What do you think about this, especially in less developed countries, the urgency versus the emergency? You have the urgency to solve a flood, but the emergency to act against climate change, for instance, right? Or the urgency of containing the water versus the emergency of getting drinking water in everybody's home. I would like to listen to you.
Yeah, I think it's the only thing that comes to mind is it's the difference between adapting to the climate crisis, which means that you're not trying to solve it. I'm trying to solve it. I think we can. I think we have 20 years to tackle getting carbon out of our buildings. And we haven't even talked about embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is all the carbon that's in the materials that we use. We talked a little bit about concrete, but operational carbon, what it takes to run a building, we need to get it to zero, period. I'm not interested in turning my attention to how do we adapt buildings to sea level rise. I mean, we're going to have to do that eventually. You're going to have to do that. I'm not. But in 20 years, or when you're my age, that's going to be a major part of your profession, I think. So maybe it's that. Maybe I want to encourage people to be activists now, to see your profession and what you do in the next 20 years as trying to solve one of the greatest crises that humans have created for ourselves. And then after that, if we just screwed ourselves over, okay, then let's talk about how we keep the water out of our buildings. Let's talk about elevating our buildings. Let's talk about how we keep the heat out, because there are going to be certain parts of Mexico that will be uninhabitable. The United States, uninhabitable. We are going to see. Have you ever heard the term climate refugees?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening every single day in your country. We haven't even seen the beginning of it. So I don't know if I answered you, Ruben, but I think that's what I would encourage right now, is that adaptation is for the next generation. Now, some people totally disagree with me, but I just think we have to keep our focus on changing the way we think about designing and building buildings so that they create no more addition to the climate crisis.
So just adding to your comment, and then I will leave the word to Diana again. So this idea of adaptation, mitigation, and resilience of the cities, it's like, well, I think you're making a shift there. I mean,
I'm making a distinction.
Let's adapt the city and so it cannot be flooded. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like Querétaro, like New York City, just a couple of years ago, right? So let's adapt the city. So let's make like docks so that we don't have floods. But I don't know if that's the correct word, but it seems like really.
No, that has to happen.
Yeah.
That has to happen anyway. All I'm saying is it's not where my interest lies.
You go.
I think somebody needs, if we didn't rebuild the levees in New Orleans, which we did over the past 20 years, then Hurricane Ida that just came through would have leveled it again. So like, we've got to do that. We've got to do both. No, there's no question about it. It's just that my interest is in rethinking how we think about buildings, how we live in buildings.
Cool. Diana.
And I'm sorry that I'm just, but come on, students, come on, just ask something. Otherwise, I will just continue. I was thinking on this letter that Herzog, it was Herzog, David Chipperfield made this claim of what was the agency of architecture, in terms of climate crisis and what we were doing about it. And Herzog just replied, come on, I mean, architects, we are really, we are not the ones that rule the world, no? We are just having like a small responsibility and a small action into the real, on constructing the real world. So from that sense, I always tell the students that our profession and also privilege comes with a price and comes with the responsibility of thinking on how, from my perspective as a designer, as an architect, can contribute to changing these conditions. But on the other hand, we live in a reality that we adapt to everything. I mean, we adapt even to the worst news, like migrations that we are just witness, and flooding, and somebody said that we became resilient in a bad way. because we don't act. It's just part of it. So we adapt and we continue on living. That's part of our nature. But then if this reality and this global crisis it should be taken for granted because it's going to happen. Again, which is the agency of the arc of our profession and the students especially, that most of the times they feel like they don't have the tools or the power to completely change something. For example, we are working on our river and say, yeah, but come on, I have to change the complete law to really achieve our goals. So what can we do?
Oh,
Just
it's a
small
great
things?
one. And it's actually in line with Villaseñor. Is that you? No. Who asked this question in the chat? If you're working with a client that doesn't care about the environment at all, from where can you start to convince him or her to trust this type concept, so forth? Like, that's similar to what you're asking. It's like, we're only architects. We don't own the buildings, do we? We're not the developers. We're not the politicians. We can't make this happen. Oh boy. There is a whole nother lecture that I could give you guys that is actually what I'm more excited about. And I'll just give you a tiny little snippet of it. But I'm going to answer that question very directly. The tiny things that you can do are, if I were to sit, because I get these clients all the time that say, yeah, this is really great, sustainability and everything, but I don't want to spend any more money. I said, okay, how about if I save you money? Oh, that'd be great. So you got to be doing this long enough to be able to demonstrate, use examples of, oh, let me show you how I can save you money on how you meter your building. Sir, do you leave the metering up to the tenant? In other words, they have their own meter, they pay for their electric, right? Yes. Well, what if utilities were a revenue stream for you rather than nothing? Because what I didn't show you was the slide of the building that we just completed and how the solar is a revenue stream for me. I'm getting $40 a month from a tenant. They're totally happy because it's half what they would be paying anywhere else. So that's number one. The solar is generating all the power anyway. So I'm making tens of thousands of dollars as a revenue stream that would not be there for another developer. I could go into details about how to build your building that would save you 6 months. And anybody who knows anything about a pro forma, a development pro forma, where the expenses and then the revenue and how do you make your money, knows that if you cut 4 months out of a pro forma, that means you're getting revenue 4 months earlier. And how do you do that? Through prefabrication. And so if you were to talk about it from the perspective of being efficient and cost effective rather than being sustainable, people's ears open up. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. So after we built this one building, it was an affordable housing. I don't know what subsidized housing. I don't know what you guys, it's like funded by the governments for people who can't afford to live in the buildings that we design, right? We call it subsidized housing or affordable housing. We built this project, there's 3 townhouses. And then I looked into how the government funds these buildings. Now, architects are awesome at research, right? You do research all better than anybody. So I researched how affordable housing gets funded. Long story short, I went to the organization that funds affordable housing. I showed them the building that we did. And I said, how about if you encourage people to build passive house buildings? And they said, sure, why not? They did. And in the first year, they funded 7 multifamily passive house buildings. And the cost to build those buildings that use 75% less energy was 2% more than the code built buildings. And so they said, that's nothing. 2% and it's using 75% less energy. Let's do it again. They did it the next year. They funded another 10 projects. Over the past 5 years, they have funded over 1,000 units of affordable housing, all built to the Passive House standard, all built at the same cost as code construction. So you know what that's called? Policy. You architects, you can get into you can start getting into where the gears, you can start turning the gears before anybody else sees them. You can get involved in how politics and policy works. If you create the right narrative around it that gets all the people who would say no, no, no on board with it. And that's one person. One person has the ability to make that kind of change. I did it for affordable housing in Pennsylvania, and then a group of us, we took it to 39 other states in the United States, 39. And to date, 17 of those states have Passive House in their funding structures, and they're building like crazy, Passive House buildings like crazy. And it all started by this one seed, by one building being built by one architecture firm, and then using that as leverage to introduce why it makes sense to build this way. You can't sit in front of somebody with words only and say, this is why it makes sense. You have to show them work. You have to demonstrate it, which means you have to put yourself out on the line and take risk. Think about what you as an architect, think about risk as it relates to you as an architect. You are in a position of almost no power, an architect, okay? You know who's in a position of power? The developer and the builder, primarily, and the banker. But you, as the architect, have the least amount of power, but the most responsibility. Think of a realtor, somebody who sells the house that you designed. In the United States, they would make, that realtor, if that house sold for $500,000, that realtor would make 5% of the sale price. An architect makes maybe 3% of the construction cost, not the sale price, construction cost. The realtor has virtually no risk. The architect has all the risk. So if you are responsible anyway, if all the risk is on your shoulders anyway, why not take it on? Like, why not really be in charge? Really push the levers that can move architecture in the direction that you want it to go, because you do have the ability. The best thing about architects is communication. That's what you do in architecture school. You don't learn how to design buildings. You learn how to communicate your ideas, because none of your buildings in architecture school have been built, have they? Nope, they're on paper. It's not about that. It's about how do you inspire somebody with your ideas through the things that you create, drawings, models, words. That's what we get really good at, I think. And so because of that, we can speak to politicians, we can speak to policy people, we can speak to government officials, and we can get common sense things moving. It doesn't seem like we have power, but we do.
That's a challenge, and then that's an inspiration, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for the answers. Says
Yeah.
Diana. I think we're running out of time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we have just one more question from the students, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
No. Well, I think, what I have seen here is, again, the second time we see each other, and you're really, again, blowing my mind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all this inspiration. I mean, showing, as you said, like small actions can do small things, but then you can go beyond that.
Yep.
I don't know, I would like to ask all the students, please turn on their cameras to say thank you to Tim.
Yeah, my pleasure.
and hope to see you soon here around. You will love the weather here.
Ah,
Yeah,
I would. I would.
I know.
See if we can get past this pandemic, and
I
then.
know.
But if any of you are in the States, anywhere near the East Coast, just Ruben has my email. You can always contact me, and if you have any questions, you can contact me as well.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll keep in touch, because I think this is very interesting for not just for the studios, but for the whole school of architecture. So yeah, we've been trying to do things like that, and we sometimes we need like someone like you to push us further.
Yeah, my pleasure. My
So
pleasure. It's really great meeting you all.
So thank you very much. Just please, everybody can give a clap or something to team virtually, using the reactions. Thank you very much for your talk. I think it has been really inspiring. Really, really thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And hope to see you soon.
Yeah, same here. All right,
Thank
good
you,
luck.
Tim.
Yep.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Gracias, Rubén.